Hi, I'm Clare Duckworth and I play the violin in the London Symphony Orchestra. You're about to hear new music by 6 composers on the LSO's Panufnik Composers Scheme. And today is the culmination of many months of writing and rewriting for them, and it's the first time they'll hear their pieces played by the full orchestra here at LSO St Luke's. Over the course of the day, they'll also have the opportunity to workshop some of their ideas with us, and I think they'll tell you a little bit more about that process later in the film. So as you can imagine, it's a fascinating day for us and we really hope you enjoy listening to the results. Do stay connected to all of our social media channels to see what we're up to, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
It's very difficult for new composers to get access to a whole symphony orchestra to play around with, and that's where this scheme comes in. It was started originally by Lady Camilla Panufnik, who's the widow of Andrzej Panufnik, who was a composer who himself spoke about how difficult it was to learn the craft when you couldn't mess around on an instrument. Normally speaking, a 70-piece orchestra is not something that every student composer can get to play with, especially one that I would venture to say we know what we're doing. Today, it's at the end of a process which begins when we've selected the composers to be on the Panufnik workshop scheme. They then get some one-on-one time with some of my colleagues who play instruments, I'm thinking here of harp or of percussion, where there are very particular technical possibilities and limitations and ways of notating that which is possible, that which is not yet thought to be possible but turns out to be possible. And so forth, which is the real, for us, the meat and drink and the joy of this process. So today's the culmination of a number of encounters that they will have had also with Colin Matthews and Christian Mason, who are themselves obviously very, very experienced and very eminent composers. But I think they guide them as to how they might best express what it is they want to say.
The induction days included composer introductions, where each composer was invited to present their work to the group. We were also given an overview of the scheme by Colin Matthews, Christian Mason and Lady Panufnik, as well as some sessions on marketing and public speaking. And lastly, we were asked to compose a short piece for a workshop with one of the LSO's harpists. My name is Ninfea Cruttwell-Reade. My piece is called Sleep Chasings, and it takes its inspiration from a poem by Walt Whitman, appearing in his collection Leaves of Grass under the final title, The Sleepers. The poem is 58 stanzas long, and my composition responds to the opening stanzas in which the speaker wanders through the night and contemplates human bodies in different states of sleep. Children in their cradles, drunkards, lovers, corpses on the battlefields, those about to be born and those about to die.
In these workshops that we did with the LSO musicians, I was really focused on trying to understand how best to use microtones, the notes that fall in between the notes on a normal piano. There's so many peculiarities when you're dealing with all these different instruments, whether it's specific fingerings for the woodwinds or how you use your lips as a brass player to create these different tunings. And so I really wanted to dive into the detail and find out what could make them work for players, what made them sympathetic and approachable for the musicians who'd be performing them.
The highlight of the scheme for me has definitely got to be all the workshop time we've had, both today with the orchestra as a whole, but also, very importantly, the workshops with individual players and small groups of players earlier on in the scheme. I've found it really valuable to try out my ideas in those sessions and gain insights from the players as well as insights from Colin and Christian.
It was really interesting in one of the sessions, I would say particularly the harp session, just to hear different ideas that other composers had. And there was one composer that was using different kinds of paper and different materials and weaving them in between strings. And that really opened my eyes to new ideas and ways of writing for the instrument that I had never thought of. I really felt that hearing the ideas of other composers on the scheme and just having the chance to explore them and workshop them was quite eye-opening. And I think that I took a lot away from those sessions.
My name is Joe Bates and my piece is called Muted the Night. The title is taken from a poem by Wallace Stevens called Peter Quince at the Clavier, which hung above my piano while I was writing the piece. Nothing specific from the poem is echoed in the piece, but its ethos and its sound and feeling seeped its way into my writing over the course of the months.
my name is Caroline Bordignon. I am a composer and fine artist from Canada. My piece, Iridescent Flares 3, is a one piece in a series of works that I am creating based off of my personal sense of synesthesia. I see music as iridescent moving colours and shapes, and then I paint live with a performance to translate my representation of synesthesia onto canvas.
When Camilla Panufnik came up with the idea of the Panufnik Young Composers Scheme, I was involved with it from the start. So we had our first scheme in 2005, started in a small way, and it's gradually grown. And it's been an extraordinary experience. I mean, just the LSO has just sort of backed us all the way, and with the amazing support of Helen Hamlin.
This has been a rather extraordinary year because the composers we're hearing today missed out on their workshop last year and have had to wait a year for it to come back. But thank goodness we can do it. Christian was one of the very earliest of the composers on the scheme and has joined me as working with the composers. I can't remember quite when, but from fairly early on.
It's been about 10 years now, I think.
Yep.
Which is, yeah, the time flies, doesn't it? Yeah, I think I did the scheme myself in 2006, which was, I mean, yeah, a defining moment in my life, I'd say. And it's just obviously incredible to have that workshop with the orchestra and the feedback of just hearing your piece as well as having had the year to work towards it. But like Colin was saying, the scheme's really evolved since then, and whereas the first few years it was a mixture of meetings between Colin and the composers and then having this big moment at the end of the year, now there's loads of little moments leading up to the big moment, and we've got the wind quintet workshops, we had one a couple of weeks ago, and sometimes string quartet workshops, brass workshops, the harp workshop is a regular fixture. So the composers really get a chance to try out lots of small-scale ideas before they bring it into the full orchestra, and I think that's a really special aspect of the scheme.
The Panufnik Composers Scheme for the London Symphony Orchestra, I think, is where we get our vision of the future from, and where we make sure that we are carefully cultivating our literature and repertoire and the art of our age. Just as we're very happy to play the music of other ages, we do think it's part of our job to make sure that our own age and future ages have their own voices too.
Today we have a reduced orchestra, spaced out and masked, so it's a very strange experience, and normally, of course, Christian and I sit with the composers and, you know, we can communicate directly with the conductor and the composers. So we're feeling it slightly at a distance, and it's not easy to make our presence felt. But the extraordinary thing is that it's happening at all, because I really thought that this year the composers might miss out. It's been a difficult time, and I think particularly for young composers, you know, at this stage in their career, it's, you know, to have had this hiatus. Losing a whole year's development has been really difficult for them.
Yeah, I mean, that 3-minute piece, even though it seems like such a small object from an external point of view, it's actually a huge investment for every individual, and you can't really move on from that until you've heard it. So to have, I mean, of course they're not the only composers suffering from this weird problem of dedicating your life to something and then having to wait indefinitely to hear it, but it's been incredibly disruptive.
Yeah, I mean, it feels as if they've been in a sort of limbo, and you know, it's a piece now that they wrote a year ago and might well want to rework, yeah. But you know, it's what it is. That's what they wrote then, and that's what we're hearing now. Jack Sheen was with us as composer in, is it 2015 or 16? And got one of the commissions for the main season as well. But he's also been making a big career for himself as a conductor. And it's great that he's here to stand in, because he's seen the thing from both sides, and it's working really well.
I've been conducting all of the workshops today, which has been really great for a few reasons. Not only is it obviously an immense privilege to conduct 7 world premieres in one day with such an amazing orchestra, but also I'm an alumni from the scheme. I was involved in the 2014 to 15 cohort, and then after that I was commissioned to make a 10-minute piece which the LSO did in the Barbican in September 2016 with Daniel Harding. So I've sort of been through the prism and out the other side, and yeah, now I'm on the other side, kind of taking the workshops and working with the composers. So yeah, it's really great. I feel really lucky to be able to sort of, yeah, had both sides of that relationship with the scheme and the orchestra. You had some people today that had written for orchestra before, you'd had some that had never written for orchestra before, and I feel like the standard was equal and the learning curves for everyone was equal. That's what's really exciting. It's not like, even if you've written a handful of pieces for a student orchestra and you show up, you know, you're working with the LSO in this context, it sort of blasts all your previous experience out of the water to some extent. These days there are a lot of commissioning schemes and there are lots of young composer things, so I do feel like composers, maybe compared to 20 years ago, have a certain expertise in rehearsals, and also orchestras like the LSO have so much experience doing this kind of stuff. There's a nice kind of cool, calm sense of excitement that means that we can really get to work and really go in details really quickly, and that composers can say, actually, let's try this whole section again, but doing something completely different, changing all of these things, which is really important, and it's so interesting for me as well. I'm always surprised as to what tiny thing can make the biggest difference in the smallest amount of time. And I like to think it surprises the orchestra as well. So yeah, really interesting.
For me, the best thing was hearing everyone's pieces. It's always exciting to hear new music, and especially after more than a year of anticipation, it's just finally really nice to hear the orchestra finally play it, and of course they play it amazingly well. What I also really found really amazing was how each piece throughout the sort of half hour of workshop, they just sort of come into focus and come to life as the musicians sort of get to know the piece. I just find that it's a really exciting part of the workshop.
It's quite a relief to hear the piece finally after a year. In some ways, with that extra time, I feel like I can see the piece more objectively. I'm not close up to the nitty-gritty of how I wrote it, and so it's quite refreshing to be able to have a bit of distance from it, step back, and hear it more clearly in a way.
I do feel like I wrote the piece like a lifetime ago, but it's also really nice in a way because you get to sort of look at the piece more objectively and gives you a bit more distance to sort of know what to ask for, I think. But yeah, it's just really nice to finally hear it.
The most important lesson I've learnt through being on the scheme would have to be the value of workshop time. I really try to maximise that wherever I can now for any project, because I think that dialogue with the players is so important. And I think probably the most interesting work I could create can come from that opportunity to really test and examine my understanding of an instrument or an ensemble and its affordances, as well as the player's approach, and to push at the outer limits of that understanding.
One of the challenges that I posed myself in writing this piece was I wanted to write fast music, which was sort of out of the comfort zone for me. So I guess one thing that I learned was that I could do it. And there are always, you know, in these workshops, there are always just things that you fine-tune, sort of certain sounds that aren't sort of quite what you expect. So like a diminuendo here and sort of a bit more attack there. And yeah, those things are just really valuable that you sort of can only get in like a workshop like this. I'm James Chan. My piece is called Tanztheater, and there are two things that inspired the piece. The first is Pina Bausch's choreography of Stravinsky's ballet Rite of Spring, which I saw at the English National Ballet. The second is Luca Guadagnino's 2018 remake of the film Suspiria. The original is 1977 by Dario Argento, and the film is set at a dance academy run by a coven of witches. And so what those two things translated into the music is two things. So a sense of physicality and also a sort of magical transformation. So throughout the piece you hear this breathing sound in the woodwind and the brass. And that sort of came from the ballet where, because it's so physically demanding, whenever there's a pause in the music, you hear all the dancers breathing on stage, and I found that to be particularly striking. And the transformation is basically a process going from turning slow music into fast music. So it starts out as a sort of very shimmering filigree violin line over slow-moving chords, which then sort of gradually turned into something a lot more restless and rhythmic.
COVID has completely turned my working life upside down, along with lots of other musicians, and it's been hard because the physical, social, acoustic dimension of live performance is so crucial to what I do. And so it's been devastating not to have that. But the rise of streaming and other online performance opportunities has been a blessing as well, because now this workshop and other pieces can reach a much wider audience online, even if it can't replace the concert experience. The pandemic didn't give me more time to compose, but it did give me more freedom in how to organize my time, because I didn't have anywhere to be, not many places to go. And so I was able to set aside much bigger chunks of time to compose, which was wonderful. The first piece that I wrote after lockdown was a 30-minute cello and piano piece, because I had the time and space to do it. The piece I finished just before the lockdown was, of course, the piece for the LSO, 3.5 minutes. So that difference in some ways represents for me the difference between my work pre and post lockdown. I'm Jonathan Woolgar. My piece is called PROTO-SYMPHONY, and it condenses the action and the grandeur of a late Romantic symphony into a tiny space of 3.5 minutes.
My experience on the Panufnik scheme has really helped me develop my instrumental writing, as well as how I think about writing for larger forces. and I'm really able to make use of that with my current projects. I'm currently working on a large-scale project for the Royal Academy of Music. It is an oratorio type piece involving children's choirs, a narrator, academy soloists and an instrumental ensemble, and that's being written for the Academy's bicentenary year celebrations in 2022. Hi, my name's Louise Drewett. My piece is called the Daymark, and the Daymark itself is a very tall octagonal stone beacon that can be found on the coast in Devon. And historically it was used as a navigational aid, a bit like a lighthouse, though it has no light, so it can only be used during the daytime. I visited this structure a couple of years ago, and that became the basis for my piece, the memory of that visit. And my piece is quite a simple structure that reflects that journey of approaching the beacon, walking around it, seeing it in close detail, and then receding. And as well as that, the beacon itself gave me ideas for this very focused, simple kind of musical material, which I could then build into a more complex whole.
Maybe the biggest loss of this year, apart from obviously the having to postpone the workshops and performances, has been that kind of stretching out of the sense of community, because of course we can meet on Zoom or whatever, but a big part of the scheme is also composers going to rehearsals and happening to bump into each other at those, or going to an LSO concert and going for a drink after. And now we can't even go for a drink after the workshop to celebrate, which is going to be a first, isn't it? So we'll have to go for some kind of socially distanced walk down Whitecross Street or something, see how that feels. But yeah, for me it's been a really big part of my kind of creative community for 15 years now, and it's great also keeping in touch with composers who are often a few years younger than me now, who when I did the scheme were obviously either my age or a few years older than me, and that sense of keeping in touch with what a large group of people are doing is really stimulating, and I think, yeah, we're all sharing a lot.
Yeah, well, it's good for both of us to be involved with younger composers and find out what they're doing. Yeah. And it's always exciting each year to go through the whole process of selecting them too. So. What happens after this scheme is that 2 of the composers get a commission for the main season. This year we're hoping we're going to be able to find something for all of them to do, just because we feel they've missed out so much. And there are small scale things. What is good is that they remain part of the LSO's community. So we have this, it's a very nice feeling, isn't it? That it spreads across the years, that they all get to know each other. And there are various other things that can be done within the various discovery schemes. So we hope we might find something for them all to continue their involvement with the LSO.